right, cool. And now you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to our panelists. And so I'm gonna drop in the chat for our panelists here what I'd like for you to say in the intro. I feel like whenever there's more than two things to say, I forget. I also spelled the word role wrong, but you get what I mean there. I'll have you all introduce yourself, just share like who you are. I think what will be important here is definitely like what program you went through, since we're talking about tech stacks being different than what you learned at Turing. So if you went through front end or back end, and what you're currently doing, what your current tech stack is. And then we'll get into the questions. I'll have you kick us off, Adam.
Hey everybody, Adam Etzion here, he, him pronouns. I was in the 2010 in cohort, so that's 2020 October I started. Current role, I'm a software engineer at Slalom, specifically their build practice. And if anyone has questions after, DM me and I can get into the distinction there. Tech stack I work with, lots of diapers. I'm on parental leave right now, so diapers and baby powder. But no, I actually first time since 2021, I'm actually working in Rails again. But they're trying to get away from it, my current client. So it's right now for my current client, React, TypeScript, Java, and Rails. I can get more into that.
Awesome. We'll go Bailey and then Eric.
Hey everybody, my name is Bailey Dively, she, her pronouns. I'm an 1808 backend alum. My current role is a staff platform engineer. And I've been at my company for 4 years. So the tech stack I work in now is different from the one I originally started in. So my original tech stack at my company was Kotlin, which is Java-based. Soon after that, React. And I like to highlight that I was in the backend program, and Spring Boot framework, a lot of NoSQL databases, AWS, Docker, bunch of tools.
Awesome. Eric.
Howdy y'all. My name's Eric Milkey, he, him pronouns. 2110 backend was my program. I am an associate consultant at Slalom, so the other side of the fence from Adam, not on the build, just the traditional consulting, I guess. And I'm a Salesforce developer. So I work with proprietary Apex on the back end and then Lightning Web Components on the front, which is like a vanilla JavaScript that we're working with.
Awesome. We'll go Anthony and his cat and then Alan.
Hi, Anthony Iacono, he, him, California, SFA area. I was in 2107 front end. I'm currently a software engineer on the reader team at McGraw-Hill, and I work mostly in Angular, so TypeScript, and on the back end, our team uses Golang. And yeah, that's it for me.
And it's my turn now?
Yes.
Am I right?
Yeah,
all right, so, yep, right from the car. Wasn't planning on traveling today, but that happened. So my name's Alon Weissman, he, him. I was in 1507 prior to the splitting of the back end front end, but that I guess means I was back end. My current title is probably like senior Salesforce architect. It just means I'm a Salesforce dev. I'm gonna go surprise my boss with my notice and take a new job in a couple weeks. And then I think my title becomes principal solutions, enterprise solutions architect. I've never cared about titles. I'm going to be doing the same thing, but maybe be in front of more people. That's it. Anyway, Salesforce guy is what we need to know.
Awesome. Sweet. This is so great. So we have folks who like did back end and worked in front end. We've got folks who like worked in one framework like React and are now working in Angular. Two Salesforce friends represent. Really awesome. So when y'all registered for this event, it asked you if you had any questions. And so I took all of those questions. So some of the questions that I'll be asking are directly from you for the folks who registered for this. And then some of them are just mine that I had. So I'll pepper those in, but I do just want to say, like, the Slack is, or the chat is open. So if you have questions at all, feel free to just post them in the chat and I'll kind of put them into my rotation as it makes sense. So no need to like sit back and wait and hope that I ask the question you want me to ask. Go ahead and put those in the chat. Or if you're more comfortable just unmuting, raising your hand and saying your question out loud, that's totally fine too. Like, this is for you all. So make sure that the things you're wondering get addressed. But I will start with a question that popped up a lot, which is that, you know, when folks are applying for jobs, they see these job postings, they see a bunch of words that don't make any sense to them. They're like, what are these things? And then some will apply anyway, some will not because they don't feel like they're qualified. So I'd love to ask you all, like, how did you decide to even apply for a role that was outside of the tech stack that you knew? How did you feel confident in applying for a role like that? I'll have you go first, Bailey.
Cool. I think the guidance at the time at Turing was don't limit yourself before others limit for you. So if it's an associate position, you should not expect to know the whole tech stack anyways. That's ludicrous. You learn on the job what you need to learn. So kind of went into the job hunt with that mindset. And I also think, you know, I reached out to most of the jobs, most of the companies I applied to chat with folks who worked there. And I always asked what the tech stack was. And I found that the tech stack that is listed on the job description is not always the tech stack that's currently used at the company or that would even be used on your squad. So again, you may be self-selecting yourself out of a job, even though it ends up being the same tech stack that you already know. So I guess guidance I would give is reach out to the company and try to connect with someone specifically to ask what the tech stack is and whether the team that is hiring actually uses that tech stack and whether there are relevant similar tech stacks that would be helpful or whether they really truly need you to have the exact experience as listed on the application.
Awesome. Yeah, Alan, I see your hand is up.
Okay, so it's funny because your question was, you know, how did you feel confident applying for these jobs? And I'm going to guess that all the other people on the panel would say, none of us were confident. That's a silly question because I definitely wasn't. But, you know, you just apply for stuff. I mean, it says junior. I'm leading into a story. I think this is what I think would be valuable to know. The way I got my job was super silly. Like I applied to some job that was listed on Indeed. I never got a call back from those people. It was through some agency that was placing people. Complete coincidence, that very same evening, the people from my cohort were going out to some bar to say goodbye to one of the people from our cohort who got a job in Hawaii. So we were all like having a goodbye for Chris. And while I was there, one of the guys in the cohort, he had gotten a job offer, and then like 2 hours after he got that job offer, he had another interview, and it's like, well, I might as well interview. They offered him the job on the spot. He took that second job, and so I was like, dude, I will talk to your recruiter and take that first job. I don't mind at all. And it turned out to be exactly the job I'd applied for earlier that day, but through a different recruiter. And I got the job, you know, because they'd already accepted they wanted something from Turing. Anyway, that's not the story I wanted to tell. I'll try to be brief. What's important is that boss, he made the point of saying, it's difficult. I mean, this was a Salesforce niche, so it might not be as difficult to find people in other areas, but for him, it was difficult to find someone, especially who was cost competitive for him, someone who wasn't going to charge a huge boatload of money to do what he needed. He's like, I just want somebody who's demonstrated that they can pick up something new and be successful with it. And by going through this program, you've demonstrated that. I mean, obviously I had to prove that to him, but that's the line, really. And so if I were placed into the same position again of being a fresh junior trying to get the job, but with the knowledge I have now, I would go into all these interviews and say, listen, like, I know you've got a lot of candidates. This is a junior role. And what I want to impart on you is not that I know all the stuff you need, because obviously I don't. But what I can tell you is I learn fast and effectively. I went through this program and it was pretty hellish. And I think I can be effective if you give me anything to do. So I will learn what you want me to do. And if that changes one day, I'll learn the new thing. They want to know that, you will be useful and you can pick up what you need to pick up. As a junior, they definitely don't expect you already have that knowledge. Maybe they want you to hit the ground running because maybe it's something you've already learned. But usually with a junior, we want good people. So focus on your attitude and your ability to learn less than your existing knowledge.
Awesome. Anything, Eric, Anthony, or Adam, you want to add to that question?
Go ahead, Eric.
Cool. Yeah, I'll just echo what Alan said, that, you know, we were all boot camp grads, right? We're all boot camp graduates. They know you're green. They know you know book smarts. What your future employer wants to know is, are you somebody who can learn? Are you somebody who can like self-teach? Are you somebody who's self-motivated to go teach? Like when I applied for the job that I have now, I didn't even know what the hell Salesforce was. I got to my final interview with the director of my practice and he was like, so tell me about Salesforce. And I was like, no, you tell me about Salesforce. And what got me the job was my insatiable need to learn, my pointing to what Alan said, pointing to Turing and saying, I learned Ruby in 7 weeks, and then I learned Rails in 7 weeks, and I learned how to do APIs in 7 weeks, and then I had 7 weeks of just kind of like putzing around in Mod 4. But, you know, the language isn't so much important as it is like the foundation that you built at Turing, right? Like programming is programming. Every language has a collection of ordered objects. This one calls it a list, that one calls it an array, this one calls it a hash. Like, you know what you need to know to go be a developer. It's just selling how quickly you can learn, how great of a teammate you are. All those soft skills that Turing gave you the opportunity to exercise and practice. That's what's going to really like set you apart from the crowd. It isn't so much your language and your competencies. They'll teach you that. They can't teach you the soft skills.
Awesome.
I'll,
Yeah, Adam.
yeah, I'll add to, so we're both at Slalom, and while you're focused on Salesforce, I'm more on just like engineering. And I will say with consulting, they have more of the expectation that you're going to jump around as a junior. So I feel that if I were to apply, if I did apply, and I did apply to, and I got a lot of rejections from places that were like, no, we're a Django shop. And I feel like to them, it's far more important that I know Django. Whereas for Slalom, it was like, well, we do a bit of everything. I did know though that they did not value Ruby just because none of their clients really used it. So I did, to make myself more confident in the application, I redid a couple Mod 1 projects in Python because it's so similar. And I think that really helped me just get my foot in the door, to be honest. But during the interview process, like for my code challenge, I told my interviewer, like, hey, I'm going to use Ruby because it's my strongest language. And he said, yeah, I don't really know Ruby, but I'll know what you're doing because it's all the same, basically. So I did all my code challenges in Ruby and sort of explained what I'm doing. But I did, to gain some confidence, like knowing they didn't value Ruby as much, I did some projects in Python and it took like half a day. So
Cool. Yeah, so that was a really good segue because one of the things that I think can freak folks out, myself included, when applying for a job in a different tech stack is the actual application process. You're like, oh my gosh, what are they going to give me as a take home? What are they going to give me as a live assessment? And Adam, I had a similar experience as you, where though the job I was applying for was not JavaScript, they allowed me to do all of my tech challenges in JavaScript because they knew that's where I'd be able to show my best. Did anybody have an experience, like, do you want to talk about your kind of technical interview experience and like, how did you balance that? Did they allow you to use the language that you were the most comfortable in, or were you kind of forced to do some self-teaching on the spot? Anthony, I'll have you start.
Yeah, I was applying, I was in the front end program, so we did React, of course, and the job that I ended up getting was in Angular. And I didn't have much time between when I found out about the interview to when we actually had the interview to study up. So what I did was I asked ahead of time, I said, what are you expecting from the interview? What can you give me like an overview? And they told me like, oh, we're doing it in Angular. We might ask you a few, behavioral questions, this, that. And it never hurts to ask what the structure of the interview will be. It was at that point they explained, I said, I've studied React. I can learn a little bit of Angular beforehand, and they were like, don't worry about it. We'll give you, we'll adjust and we'll give you questions that you could answer with even just plain vanilla JavaScript. So asking ahead of time, for me, I just made sure to watch a few YouTube videos and tutorials on Angular to make sure that I could go into that interview and say, I know how state management works in React. And this is what I understand about how state management works in Angular. And these are the trade-offs. So I know just enough to kind of to be starting to form an opinion about all those fundamentals, state management, unit testing, MVC models, like all of that. It's every framework does it some way. And usually they map over pretty closely one-to-one. But being able to demonstrate that I have strong tech fundamentals, and I can tell you everything. I can explain those in React, and this is what I know in Angular. I think that helped a lot, and the different tech stack was not an issue at all in the interview process because of that.
Awesome. Bailey, what was your technical interview experience?
Mine was actually pretty great because I got to choose, I had a take-home challenge that I spent about a week on, basically building an API. And I could choose, because I was applying to a platform position, and I could choose my language. So awesome. Felt very equipped for that. And then the second part of the technical interview was going in the office for a whiteboarding challenge. One of them was solving and, building an algorithm. Again, you're whiteboarding, so it doesn't really need to like run. So you don't have to be perfect, but I could choose the pseudo language, if you will, that I coded. And then I was able to do more of like an object-oriented design session, which was super not tied to any language whatsoever, and was more about those key concepts that I could highlight that I learned at Turing that are not language agnostic, which Anthony was just chatting about. But I would say, so that was the interview process we used to use. We use a new interview process now. And I do a lot of technical interviews on the other end of the table. And a big portion of our technical interview is actually in Ruby on Rails. And we have a lot of devs applying with varying levels of experience who don't have Ruby on Rails on their application. And I always check that first, just to level set on my expectations. You could have been in the industry for 10 years, but if you've never touched Ruby on Rails, you could have the same questions about the program as a Turing graduate or someone who has a lot of in-depth knowledge. And the best folks who interview who don't necessarily know the tech in the project are ones that, as Anthony described, can understand what they're reading or ask questions about their understanding, and then pivot that understanding with what they know more deeply in the tech stack that they have a lot of experience with. Because again, a lot of different teams have a lot of different types of tech stacks at my company. And so the more you can sort of pivot back and forth and see similarities and differences between those technologies, I think the more you're actually to be able to be effective at the company, because you could be moved to another team and have to sort of start over that learning at a moment's notice.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. I think like just because you are at zero with a specific language, you are not at zero. Like y'all know so much. And yeah, I totally agree, Bailey. Like the ability to make those lines and like connections between what you know and what they need you to know, I think is a really big selling point. Awesome. Anything else like Eric or Alan that you want to add on the technical interview? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing that I mean, it's been like 8 years since I went to Turing, so I don't know if they've changed some of the things they teach in the back or the front end program, but I can tell you that in the time that I've left and I've worked with students, like I taught Salesforce to a lot of students as well back at Turing, and so I've had to try to teach in this area and work with people who came out of the same program, and I didn't realize it because it's been so gradual for me, but I had like no understanding of databases. And this might be more a Salesforce thing than in other. You're not necessarily touching all the time, but it seems to me like it's probably important to know more about how databases work and maybe how SQL works a little bit. Like, I'm not saying you need to be an expert, but the only technical question I remember from my first interview had to do with like the difference between an inner and an outer join. And I kind of answered it all right. I think I did okay, but I didn't feel good about it. And I can tell you now that a strong understanding of databases is like the number one most useful thing in my job. And so when I have taught people Salesforce, I've tried to touch on that. There's been a lot of discussion about databases. So knowing that I think it's a missing spot in Turing, unless they've corrected that over the last many years, I think it would be helpful to spend a little bit of personal tutorial time just understanding relational databases, maybe learning a little bit more about SQL querying, because I think I spent like an hour and a half at Turing doing that, and it wasn't enough.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, we just talked a lot about how the heck you all got the job. So now let's talk about how do you do the job, right? That's like the next battle is now you're hired and you need to do the work. And there's a question in the chat kind of pivoting us in that direction. So now that you're hired, right? I saw this question pop up several times in the registrations, which is like, essentially like, how quickly was your company expecting you to be like a contributing member of the team when it comes to this new technology? Like, what did that ramp up process look like? And what was sort of offered to you from the company, whether it was just like time to learn or actual resources to help get you up to speed? And Eric, I know Slalom does it in a very specific way when it comes to Salesforce, but I'll have you start and talk about what your experiences were, and then we'll jump to some other folks.
Sure. Yeah, it's a pretty unique experience. Onboarded, spent the first 8 weeks going through a Turing Lite sort of Salesforce like boot camp that I understood absolutely nothing of. I felt more confused there than I did at Turing. The messaging from like all of my peers at Slalom didn't help either. They're like, this isn't matter. This doesn't matter. This isn't important. Like, you can kind of blow this off. I was like, what the how? Like, I'm going to be staffed in like 2 months. How am I supposed to blow this off? So that was a little frustrating. But then I had about a month and a half after that little boot camp before I got thrown in to my first engagement where I was just kind of on my own. The nice thing about Salesforce is they have these things called trailheads, where it's basically like a really nice YouTube tutorial that takes you step by step through all of the different things that you want to learn about Salesforce and gives you examples, projects to build. Like, it's very hands-on learning, which is really, really great. But a month and a half later, I was staffed on a project and just kind of thrown to the wolves, for lack of a better phrase. The great thing about Slalom is that you're never actually out there on your own. My team had a senior consultant, a solution architect who had been working in Salesforce for 3 years, and they made it very clear every opportunity that they got, if I had a question, that I could reach out to them at any point and ask. In that time, I know I saw a question in here about how do you manage, when do you ask for help? Let's throw a quick one out there. While I was at Turing, I used the Palm timer, and whenever I would get frustrated, I'd set a 20-minute timer. I'd work for 20 minutes in my frustration, give myself a 10-minute break, come back, work on it for 10 more minutes, and if I didn't solve it, reach out for help. And that kept me at a learning pace that wasn't holding my team back, increased my ability to learn, and I was making contributions basically from the first week on, having only known Salesforce for like a month. So
Awesome. Adam.
Yeah, this is top of mind for me. I did not have such a cushy onboarding experience, Eric. So I'm currently working on an SE Software Engineer Academy for Turing to try to give folks who maybe aren't, to open up our funnel a bit. So folks that maybe we wouldn't generally hire, but they're almost there. We're trying to hire them anyway and have this like program set up, kind of similar to what you talked about, where they have a month or so going through some learning. But I, on day one, was staffed on like a Django project and had no Django experience. So, and like they don't pay for my Pluralsight license. Pluralsight is like a platform you can learn. They have a ton of videos. It's pretty nice. So they pay for some stuff, and I bought a ton of books and just built it, and they expensed all my books, which is really like nice of them. but no hand holding really. What I generally do for each new project. So first project was Django, second one was .NET and React. And each time was my first time ever using these technologies. Now it's Java. I've never used Java before. So go into Pluralsight and go to the docs, and kind of every doc page generally has a, hey, here's how you build a hello world, and like try to just like get somewhat familiar. And as long as it's not like Go or a language that's really foreign, I can kind of get my head wrapped around it. But then I've also noticed that for me, I could do a bunch of Pluralsight, build a Twitter clone sort of crash courses, but then I look at the client code base and it's like a mess, or it's implemented in a completely different way. Currently, the Rails database, apparently the way they built the app for my current client is a mess, and it's you really have to just dive into it to understand it. So I get like most of the way there and some basic understanding, and then I really just have to like deal with the code to really get to know it. And it's different every time. One project, it took me a few weeks. I just talked to my senior like architect on my current project, and he said, listen, you're gonna be lost for the first 5-6 months until you really understand it. Like, don't beat yourself up. And I asked if he was serious. He was very serious. So this current code base is really big and complicated, and it'll take me 5 months to get into it. So yeah, for what that's worth, that's my general process. Oh, and one last thing, the first few weeks on a new project or a new team, if you're not like a consultant, I spend more hours than I'm paid for learning. So first few weeks, I'm learning and doing side stuff on nights and weekends. And I think it behooves you to do that. If a lot of people don't like that, like, no, I work my whatever hour a week, that's fine. But I think it behooves you to, if you really want to get up to speed, hit the ground running, make a good impression, and you can do that, and you have like the mental capacity to do it and the emotional space to do it. You don't have a ton of kids or whatever. Just do it. It really helps.
Yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, I before I worked at McGraw, I was at a startup for 6 months, and I found that at that startup and at McGraw Hill, even in stacks that I understood or learned, the code base did not necessarily reflect industry conventions or best practices. And so I had some long discussions with mentors. One of them in particular, we had a long talk about this, about tackling cryptic code bases. And he wrote up a blog post with a really, based on that discussion, with a really good breakdown of how to approach legacy code in an efficient and effective manner as a human being. And I highly recommend that. I put the link in the chat. So yeah, it's just also to manage expectations. Just because even if you know a stack, doesn't necessarily mean the way that the company has implemented the stack is going to line up with what you learned on tutorials or at Turing or elsewhere. I've seen a lot of very interesting implementations, and whatever you see, you gotta learn, because it's not gonna. Code bases don't change structurally at any fast clip. So it's an important skill to have. I mean, that's basically what we've all been talking about, demonstrating that you are a quick learner, that you've quickly learned things in the past, and you can quickly learn things in the future. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super helpful. And totally agree that there's a lot of code out there that does not follow what you hope that they would follow. Awesome. Bailey, how do you like balance when you're working in something? It seems like you've worked in all sorts of languages across the stack. Like, how do you balance the, like, I'm going to figure this out on my own and it's time to reach out and get support elsewhere? What does that look like for you on the job?
Depends. The answer is always depends. I think the first thing to do is communicate effectively with your team. I mean, the best thing you can do, period, in this whole discussion is be honest on your resume, be honest in your interview, and be honest with your manager. Like, don't overinflate what you know about the tech stack that you may or may know nothing about, because that is going to put you even more stress on your head day one, right? So be honest, be enthusiastic about your ability to learn quickly. Y'all are in Turing or you've graduated from Turing. You know that you're wicked smart. You know that you can do this. It's just, you need to be given the opportunity to do so. So absolutely like enhance and chat about that, but do not falsify anything about your ability to work in a new, or your experience with a new tech stack. So checking in with your manager day one and like making a plan with your manager about how you're going to get trained is really important. And that includes looping in your coworkers. And some companies you end up with a tech buddy or someone who is supposed to be your go-to while you're onboarding, and you're going to have a million questions. And it's sort of the expectation that that person is there to answer all of your questions. You may not have someone like that, but you should have like a team of people that you should ask questions to. So when I first started out, with my tech buddy, I did not really struggle for too long before I reached out and asked for help, because I literally didn't know anything. I didn't know the tech and I didn't know the business logic. And I didn't know, like, in this huge code base, where to even look. Like, to Anthony's point, my company does have a Ruby on Rails monolithic application, but it's so big. Even though I could read an individual method, I had no idea where to find that method in like the cruft, the spaghetti code that is an old monolithic application. As time went on and I got a little bit more experience and I got more comfortable with Kotlin, I got more comfortable with the code base, then I would typically put together a list of questions and wait for a specific time of day to reach out to somebody. That way we could kind of chat through all of my questions and get unstuck at once. And I wasn't just constantly pinging one or two people with questions throughout the day, because that can be frustrating for them as well, because they have their own tickets that they're working on. And then eventually that sort of segued into, you know, working on a ticket, getting stuck, and to a comment someone else made, like, I will spend an hour, maybe two, Googling, testing, running the code, trying to get unstuck on my own. And then I will eventually go back and ask my team for advice. And that usually results in pairing with folks to get unstuck.
Awesome. Yeah, there's always
Can
a
I
balance.
piggyback?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Sorry, Kale, I didn't mean to do
No,
that.
you're
I was gonna ask
totally
if I could
fine. You're
piggyback
good.
off of Bailey. And I'm gonna
Yes.
turn my video off because I'm not 100% sure my data is real great right now. So I want to conserve. So before I start, first of all, I'm going to upvote what Eric said about the Pomodoro timer. I never thought of anything like that. You should totally do that so that you don't get stuck in a rut for 3 hours from the Self Center. But the path I want to go down now is totally different. What Bailey was just saying about being honest about what you can do, what your skill sets are, I 100% agree with, because you want to manage expectations. But I want to counter that by making sure we all are very careful not to let our own honesty become imposter syndrome or cause it, or allow it to defeat our confidence. I've lived this lifelong like dream with white man privilege, where I can just walk in somewhere and pretend I'm confident about stuff and it can get me anywhere. I don't understand it. But like, it's real. And you need to be able to accept that even though you don't know what you're doing because you're so junior, we all go through that. You can't express to them that you're useless because of it, because that's not true, right? But it happens for all of us. We all think, you know, I don't know this, how could I be useful? And let me tell you, even when you are experienced and you change jobs, you definitely feel that. I'm about to change jobs in 2 weeks and I'm very scared about it, but I'm going back to a boss that I worked with 7 years ago. So like, I still feel comfortable, but totally uncomfortable. It's really frustrating, the feelings that are going on right now. So I just want to say, again, be super honest, but don't let the honesty with yourself degrade how you present yourself to others, because you can be honest and inquisitive without letting yourself come off as inadequate, because we all know that's not the case.
Yeah, totally. If you've ever been my student, then you know that I say, like, let them say no. That's like my mantra, is like, apply anyway. You know, you look at it and you can say like, oof, I don't think so. I don't think I got it, but apply anyway, present with confidence. Yes, lead with honesty, right? I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, Ruby, like, we're best friends, I know everything, but I'm not going to just be like, I don't know anything about Ruby, and that's the end of the sentence. You know, you're going to like also talk about the things that you do know. And like several people have said, drawing those connections between what you do know and what they want you to know. Awesome. One of the things that I think pops up for folks, and I remember this being a feeling of people in my cohort when I was a student, which is like, dang, like I just like gave all this time and spent all this money to learn, like insert here, React, Ruby with Rails, whatever it is, right? And now I'm gonna like go do something else. And I think that's like a very interesting mindset because you like learned that thing, and being able to do that thing is what's going to allow you to learn this new language, right? So it's definitely not a waste. But I guess my question is like, did any of you have feelings like that? Have you seen like the value in the things that you learned, even if it was totally different what you're working in now? Like Ruby is not Salesforce. Do we see those connections? And did you feel like there was any loss that you weren't doing the thing that you learned? Eric, I'll start with you because I feel like yours is like a pretty big difference between what you learned at Turing and what you're doing now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was very frustrated the first 6 months that I was at Slalom. Salesforce's whole like paradigm, right, is clicks over code. They want you to use their declarative tools to solve for 80 to 90% of the problems on the platform and then use custom code. So as an associate consultant, all of my stories were declarative. I was clicking buttons, just clicking all day long and just thinking to myself, what the did I just spend all that money on? How is Slalom? I was the 16th person that CRM Salesforce has hired from Slalom or from Turing, sorry. It's like, how has Slalom CRM hired so many Turing grads and like not given them developer roles? Like, what am I even doing here? And expressed that to other Turing grads who were still there, and they said, just hang on, just be patient, like it'll come. Once I finally did start getting development tickets, actual code problems in a language I had never written in before, in a language I had never read before, that same like dopamine hit that solving, the independent challenge every Wednesday or getting back the 4s on your projects, that same dopamine hit started kicking in again. It's like, okay, cool. Like this isn't Ruby, but I am a developer. Like I am doing the thing, actually putting colored words on a screen and getting paid to make those colored words do cool stuff. But yeah, those first 6 months were really rough, but in the end, it paid off. So.
Awesome. Anthony.
Yeah, I think it might be more important to fix that the misperception that Turing is teaching you a technology. It's not, and it was pretty clear to me from the instructors and the curriculum that what I'm learning is not the MDN page for HTML element. What I'm learning is a problem-solving process, and I mentor students now, and it's always sometimes there's this, because there's deadlines and projects are doing all that. Sometimes there can be a tendency to like, I just got to get this done, and bypass the whole problem-solving process. Almost never works out. Almost always takes longer. And so when I'm mentoring, I focus on the systematic problem-solving process. I posted it elsewhere on Turing Slack, but I'll try to find it. But whatever your problem-solving process is, use it. Memorize it, like memorize the steps. I can go through like, understand the prompts, determine what the IOCEs are, the inputs, outputs, constraints, edge cases. Like there are problem solving processes you could find online, you could develop your own, but find out what works and stick to it. And that will be a touchstone in the interview process. It'll be as an engineer every day. Whenever I'm wasting time, when I look back, it's because I skipped a step in the problem-solving process. Nobody's paying. They're not paying you because you know what MDN knows or know what ChatGPT knows. They're paying you because you know a process and you can apply it. And so, personally, I didn't experience any sense of loss when I stopped using React on graduation day. Not at all. And one last, I guess one last thing, or one thing to piggyback off of that is you all have access to an excellent tool now, which is ChatGPT and these other AI tools. And with ChatGPT in particular, you can use custom instructions. And what you might try doing is putting in a blurb about your background, what you know. I know React, or I know Ruby. And what that does is everything you ask ChatGPT, ChatGPT knows your background and where you're coming from and can tailor its responses to that. So if I say I'm a React developer and I ask ChatGPT a question about Angular, it's gonna say, oh, like this is how you might this concept from React, this is how you would do it in Angular. So leveraging these tools, it's something it's mind-boggling the amount of work I can get done now, leveraging knowledge that I have translated by ChatGPT into areas that I'm not familiar with yet. So
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, I totally would agree with we're taught at Turing to problem solve, and then we can apply that to many things. But I do think you can do some things as you're job searching or as you're still at Turing to help set you up for success and a little more happiness. Like my wall was covered in sticky notes. I did so many mind mapping, like what brings me joy? What's my identity? Like all that cushy stuff. Like I did it with sticky notes, and it kind of helped me. And I talked to a ton of people. So every job that I applied to, I talked to like 6 of their junior devs, or 2 if they only had 2. So I would do that if you have, again, the time and the mental space to do that. And then also I find there's like this philosophy that people, it's like either, hey, get paid to code as soon as you can, like get the boot camp stench off of you, whatever, take any job, and then like you can always go to a different job. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, which is, hey, be a little pickier. And I don't think you should go with one way or the other, but I was maybe a little bit more on the picky side. I remember I turned down a job that just seemed hyper data focused, and I was like, talked to a bunch of data engineers. I was like, I don't really want to do that. I wasn't as interested in Salesforce either. And then, so I said no to actually at least one role, because I was just like, oh, I also knew from talking to people, hey, I didn't want to do QE or testing. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what I don't want to do. And that kind of helped narrow it down. But there is a lot of value to just, hey, getting paid to code. So you got to find what works for you.
Cool. Bailey, you've worked in a lot of languages. Have you found that being able to work in so many languages has kind of given you an idea of which parts of being a software developer you like and which parts maybe you don't like as much? Like, I'm just wondering, like, if you have so much context in so many different places, because like a lot of our grads only know the thing that they've learned so far. Do you feel like when you're going for the next position or the next job, you like have a better understanding of maybe the jobs that you would or wouldn't like? I feel like that was a really leading question, but I'm like, say yes, but I'm just genuinely curious about that.
Yeah, I think, it definitely, knowing several languages lets you identify, every language has similar patterns, right? Like, I think we mentioned MVC is a pattern that's used across languages. It's very language agnostic. So it becomes a lot easier to onboard to any new company and sort of get the flow of the data and whether it's organized well or not, sort of regardless of language. And walking into a messier code base can be more stressful for an engineer because it requires more work with some legacy code, which can be frustrating. But I think more than anything, like as you progress in your career, yes, it's good to have lots of experience across languages, I think, because it just means you could switch jobs more effectively and get another position somewhat quickly versus just staying in the same tech stack. But I think it's just very, after a while, you're not even thinking about code anymore. You're thinking about higher level architecture and how do these different services work together, and how is the data passed between services, and what's the rate of that data flow. And so the problems you're solving are actually a little bit removed from what kind of language is used, and it's more of higher level architecture. And so those are sort of the more interesting problems that you solve as you progress in this career. So that's, I guess, hopeful if you get like sort of sick of learning new languages, given the opportunity, like you can eventually pivot to looking at larger level diagrams of your technology.
Awesome. And Adam, you've been working, obviously, like every project has been a new tech stack. Do you feel like you've started like gathering opinions about languages versus some languages versus others? Do you have like a favorite? Are there things that you do or don't like? Like, how has it affected your like kind of bird's eye view of coding now that you've had your hands in so many different areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think from jumping around so much, I've learned more what I do and don't like. Like, I don't want to be necessarily doing more front end than back end. Kind of like being a full stack developer, but I don't want to be the guy who's just, taking beautiful designs and making them beautiful in reality and making this box dynamic. And, I still, it kind of cemented like, okay, no, you chose back end for a reason. That's not your thing. So that was helpful. But I have a lot more respect for front end now. Having gone through React, I was like, front end, like, yeah, I'm just moving boxes, blah, 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 like the typical what backenders say. But React is incredibly interesting. There's a lot of like problems that you have to solve. There's a lot of just with dynamic programming in React, like it's so interesting the things you have to do and the different ways you can implement components and the logic structure. Like there's a lot of like, you can scratch that back end itch of like you love logic and business logic and how things work together in front end. And I really enjoy React and that part of it. I don't like just like focusing on, hey, making the styling and all that beautiful, but the guts of React and working with those like components within components and state management especially is like fascinating. And that's what attracted me to backend more, just that like really interesting aspect of it. And just state management in React definitely scratched that itch. So I was also surprised, like, hey, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in front end. Hence now I'm like, full stack engineering is pretty cool. I've also, from jumping around a lot, I've worked on a lot of different teams, and I'm also super attracted to what we call at Solid Build, the solution owner role. So sometimes they have a technical background, sometimes they don't, but they're more like project management. They're helping like create the backlog and create the issues and talk with the business leads to, I guess, in a startup or the normal company, that would be like the product manager. But that's been super interesting as well. So jumping around in different teams, I got to see how different people approach that role. And like, I could totally see myself maybe pivoting to that space in the future.
Awesome. Eric, Salesforce. People have feelings one way or the other about Salesforce. One of the feelings that I think folks have about it is like that you're like choosing that path. You're just going to be a Salesforce developer forever. And so I'd love to ask you, like, do you feel like if and when there's job number 2, will you have to apply for Salesforce jobs, or do you feel empowered to apply for other jobs as well?
Great question, and definitely something that I wrestled with during those 6 months of darkness. But no, I think if I were to leave the Salesforce ecosystem, I would feel very confident applying for a traditional web development job. The soft skills that I'm learning from project management side of things that Adam was touching on, to Bailey's point about the architecture of what you're building, Salesforce has really strict limitations on what you can and can't do within the platform. So figuring out how to make things efficient, figuring out how to minimize the load that's happening behind the scenes, all of those like bigger questions that Bailey so gratefully highlighted, those apply to Salesforce. And as I wrestle with those, that's language agnostic. That's just software development. That's programming. So no, I wouldn't feel like lesser or undeserving.
Good. I was hoping you would say that, or else this was going to like turn into a weird pep talk that everybody else had to listen to. Cool. Alan, I'll have you, like, this will be our last question. I'll have y'all close out after your response.
So, I mean, I just felt the need to jump in here since I was the first Salesforce person coming out of Turing. And I kind of, I don't know, for whatever reason, I feel like it's my baby. Uh, and I've had this exact conversation many, many times with all sorts of people, especially because I took on a lot of students for the Salesforce. And my response is that, 6 months in, I had a very similar, by the way, period of time, Eric. 6 months, I was like finally maybe not banging my head on the desk. Mostly because I was so angry it wasn't Ruby, because Ruby did all sorts of cool stuff. And Salesforce we haven't mentioned this, it's just Java. Well, the backend Apex stuff it's just Java with a coat of paint on it. And there's also very React/Angular-ish in Lightning Web Components. So there's kind of like two different ways you can approach some of the programming. And then, of course, there's the non-programming declarative side we talked about. But what I'm trying to say is after 6 months, I'd completely forgotten Ruby. I knew it did cool stuff, but I couldn't build anything in Rails, if you held a gun to my head. And if I was learning C or direct Java or working in JavaScript or Django or Go or whatever, I would have forgotten Ruby and I would have known what I was working on. And then when I got another job, if it was in some other stack, I would have forgotten what I had just learned and I'd learned the thing I'm working in. So it's, to me, the question doesn't hold up, and I don't mean to be rude about it, but like, you're going to know whatever you work in. And I think Adam might have some luxury here, and there's pros and cons where he's gotten to learn a whole bunch of stuff and perhaps in that way retain a lot of it because he's constantly jumping. But at the same time, I'm guessing, Adam, if you could confirm or deny, that he feels like perhaps he's less of a master in each of those areas because he hasn't been able to prove himself, for a really long time in one particular area. Not to say one path is better than the other, but the idea that going into Salesforce specifically is pigeonholing, it's exactly the same as going into any role, anywhere, doing anything. You learn that thing, you forget the other stuff. If you switch, you can learn the other stuff too. We've talked about that several times. But we're just people who are good at learning. But I could then also go on and talk for ages, which I will not do, about some of the benefits of Salesforce. Also, I will say that I'm not one to drink the Kool-Aid, and I will rag on Salesforce all day long because there's a million things that horribly. So like, you got to take the good and try to just ignore or accept the bad. But like, there's nothing, I don't think there's any language you could go into where you're hurting yourself unless it's like so obtuse that you don't have any translatable skills. But I couldn't even think of an example if you asked me. What would be like that? You're always going to have translatable skills.
Awesome. Really great answer. My husband is a Salesforce developer, so I feel like it's pretty easy for me to come up with these antagonizing questions. Awesome. So we've got 6 minutes left, and I just want to leave space for you panelists. If there's anything that you haven't gotten to share yet that you were hoping to share in this panel, that like my questions didn't lead to, I just want to leave the last 6 minutes to really like close out with any last thoughts y'all have. And I'll just like leave it awkwardly open where you all will unmute at the same time and it'll be great. Or even more awkward, no one unmutes and we all just stare at each other. But I'm good with awkwardness. I taught high schoolers long enough. Yeah, Anthony.
Yeah, I'll share something. If I see a job posting, I assume that it's already taken usually by an internal referral of somebody knows at the company. So if I do apply to a posting that I see out in the wild, I'm not applying because I hope to get that job. I usually don't even apply, but I use that job posting to narrow down on LinkedIn who the hiring managers are, who the team is, whatnot, and start to put the feelers out and do outreach, do research on those people, try to find a way to tailor a LinkedIn message or an email that will get their attention, so that hopefully get into a coffee chat, and then I will know about future hiring with them. But very rarely will I ever apply for a job that's posted because I just assume it's already taken. That's how it is at my company. In fact, the job that I applied for and got, it was only after we shook hands and they hired me that they were like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to put this posting out there on the public careers website. Can you log on and apply as a formality? So it hadn't even been posted yet. It was only just an administrative thing. So I would keep that in mind. because if we're talking specifically about tech stacks, different tech stacks than we're trained in. If you see any company that's hiring for any level, junior, mid, doesn't matter. It's more important that the companies reflects your values and that you are interested in the company. Use whatever job postings you see to start tailoring your search. And then when an opening does come up, it could be in your tech stack, it could not be. You will know about it because of those connections you've made at the company. So I'm just going to put a link here. All this is covered in the 2-hour job search. And that's like when I was at Turing, I read this and completely changed my job search, my job hunt tactics. And that's when the offers started coming in. So, yeah.
Can I tag off that real fast? Anthony's point about making sure that like the company you're working for is a cultural fit for you. That was the main driver for my job hunt. I was not looking for a specific language. I was not looking for a specific industry to work in. I was not looking for a specific tech stack or any of those things. I wanted to find myself at a company that valued me as an individual and that set me up for success through the duration of my career. And Adam actually in mod 2 gave a little day in the life of a dev and like put Slalom on my radar. Slalom came to Turing, had a hiring fair. I didn't pay attention to a single bit of the hiring fair. I just knew Slalom was hiring and I was going to wait to the end when they said, send this dude your resume. I sent that dude my resume, went through the hiring process. Didn't even know what Salesforce was, but I knew that Slalom was where I wanted to land. And I tailored all of my questions and my 3 interview processes around the culture at Slalom and how they would help me develop as a developer, as an individual, as a consultant. And really, through that process, it sold me on Slalom. So don't stress the language. Don't stress the tech stack. Unless you have a language and a tech stack you absolutely want to work in. Like I had a friend back in mod 1 who absolutely wanted to work in Go, and he was not going to accept any other job other than Go while learning Ruby and everything else. I was like, all right, knock yourself out. He got hired 2 weeks after mod 4 as a tier 2 dev doing Go. Good for him. Identify what you need most in your job to feel successful and to feel valued. If it's a language, great. If it's company culture, awesome. Tailor your questions and tailor your search around those priorities and let that be your driving factor. It doesn't matter what language, unless it does.
Yeah, I love that, Eric. The only thing I would add, and this is just sort of what you're getting at, like a lot of us are afraid to apply to a job with a new tech stack, not because we can't learn it or we don't believe that we can learn it, but because we're afraid that we're not going to have time or support to learn it, right? If we know we're applying to a company that is willing to put in the time and support for us to eventually be a contributing member to the team, to eventually be able to level up in the engineering track at the company, like that's what we all want. So make sure in this interview process that you try to ask questions to pull on the thread of whether that support exists, whether there's an onboarding system that exists to help you with your goals. Like I know Adam mentioned earlier that when he switched tech stacks, he works a lot of weekends and evenings, and that's fine if that makes you feel better about like switching to the new tech stack and that's exciting, then go for it. But if that's the expectation, that's a red flag. So just remember, you're always interviewing the company that's interviewing you. You could be the best engineer in the world, but if you don't have the support that you need, it will look like failure, but it's not your failure. It's your company's failure.
Preach. Yes, agreed. I'm just here as y'all's hype man. I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's like the only thing I'm contributing is like, yes, what you said. Okay, it's 4:01, so I'm gonna cut us off. But thank you so much, panelists, for being here. For real, super, super valuable. And for anyone who attended, I will post the recording in the new grad services channel. In that channel, I will also tag all 5 of the panelists that are here. And so panelists, you might be getting some DMs for people who want to follow up and chat more about the things that you mentioned here. But that's it. Thank you all so much, and I'll see y'all later.